in the Old Testament, there's a bunch of laws that were given to kind of govern God's people that sound a little bit bizarre. I want to read some of them to you, okay? God's people couldn't eat pigs, so no pork Sunday roast. They couldn't eat camels. That might be a good thing. They couldn't eat rabbits, and they couldn't eat shellfish. So if you're partial to a prawn cocktail, that was out. There was a certain length of time after giving birth before a woman could then come again to the temple. If you touched a dead body, or you touched a grave, or you touched some bones, you had to go through a whole kind of ritual of being washed before you were allowed to come back into the camp. You had to stay out for the rest of the time. There were certain kinds of clothing that they weren't allowed to wear. Here's an interesting one. If mildew was found in your house, now that's going to be most of us, isn't it, in Scotland. If mildew was found in your house, you had to call the priest had to come, the priest would inspect your house, and then they'd clear your house, get all your stuff out, then your house would get stripped bare and it would get repaired. Okay? Now, these are just a few of the laws in the Old Testament that were given to govern things that were, here's the word, unclean. Unclean. Now, some of these things might have had practical wisdom to them, but these things were things that made the people of Israel distinct and different from all the nations around them. These were not, now this is what we need to understand, these were not mainly health laws, these were holiness laws. And they taught one kind of big, simple truth, and this is it. There is such a thing as clean and unclean, and the God of Israel is a God who is perfectly, purely, completely clean. Okay? Now, as we drop into Mark chapter 7, we come and we encounter these guys called Pharisees again. Now, Stevie said they were religious leaders. I'm going to say that these guys are clean freaks. Right? These are clean freaks. Now, in the room, you might describe yourself as a clean freak. There's a range of habits and levels of cleanliness in the room. Not to kind of out our two women's workers. One of them's really smiling at me. Jen doesn't really like cleaning, do you, Jen? That's not to say Jen and Mark's house is minging, or that you should avoid it. But Jen doesn't really like it. Morag likes it so much she's got an extra job cleaning every day. Okay? Now, I don't know what you're like. You might be somewhere in between. That's probably healthy. When it comes to the Pharisees, we're not talking about them being clean freaks like Morag for the sake of cleanliness. We're talking about cleaning for reasons of tradition and religiousness. So if you look back in your Bible at how Mark helps us understand in verses 3 and 4 what's going on with these guys. He says the Pharisees and all the Jews, they don't eat unless they wash their hands properly. And here's the key phrase. Holding to the tradition of the elders. And he tells us they do all these other kinds of washing as well. So these are not God's commands about clean and unclean. These are the Jewish religious leaders' extra demands that have become traditions. Now, boys and girls, question. Is it good to wash your hands before dinner? Yes. Why don't we wash our hands before dinner then, Connie? we should. Next time, today. Yes, there's nothing wrong with washing your hands before dinner, is there? No, it's a good thing to do to wash your hands before dinner. But these Pharisees, these scribes, they think all of this washing, according to their traditions, isn't just a good thing to do, but actually makes them in some way clean before God. Well, they then see in verse 2 some of Jesus' disciples eating with unwashed hands, and then say in verse 5, why don't your disciples walk according to the tradition of the elders, but they eat with defiled, that is, unclean hands? So their concern isn't for the disciples. Oh, there might be germs on their hands. Their condemnation was that their unwashed hands made them dirty and defiled before God. That's the theme we've got, okay? With me? Yes, good. Okay, now we're going to see in this passage how Jesus exposes and rebukes these proud religious leaders. And then he teaches deeper about the depths of human defilement. It's going to feel a little bit bleak. But then we're going to see at the very end of the passage the breadth of his mercy to an unclean, humble outsider, which gives an awful lot of hope to you and me. All right? First of all then, if you're taking notes, here's the first heading. Unmasking our attempts to clean up our act. And we're going to see Jesus call into question everything on which these religious leaders are kind of staking their hope for acceptance with God. Have a look at what he calls them in verse 6. Verse 6. Well did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites. That's what he says. Hypocrites. Now, hypocrites were actors. That's where the word comes from. Hypocrites were actors in ancient Greece. They were stage performers. They were actually stage actors who wore masks. They were pretenders. That's what a hypocrite was. Jesus says, hypocrites. Their claimed cleanness, Jesus is saying, is just a mask. Now look at what he quotes from Isaiah 29. This people honors me with their lips, he says, but their heart is far from me. So the Pharisees' problem is they pretend to be clean while pointing the finger at others. Now, danger. Before we turn into the Pharisees and be hypocrites and think this is Jesus' rebuke for them and not me, I want us to think just about the fact that the pride of the Pharisees lurks in you and it lurks in me. And often it shows itself in pretty similar ways. Here's the first way. We also prioritize the outside over the inside. We prioritize the outside over the inside. The Pharisees are obsessed with washing. So they wash their hands, they scrub them. They wash their pots, they wash their cups, they wash their kettles, they wash their couches. All of the kind of outward stuff that they can do that they think can make them clean. Also, all the things that they can do which shows off to people around them that they are respectable. Now, Phoebe borrowed a book from me yesterday. She came and raided my study. That's not permission for open season on coming and stealing all my books. But the book's called When People Are Big and God is Small. And that's the Pharisees' problem. In their view, people are big and God is small. That's why their religion was sparkly clean, but it's skin deep. And we do the same thing. We prioritize what we look like on the outside over what we're really like on the inside. And so this is what we do. We measure our cleanliness before God by how many people we've had round for tea. How much we've given to church or to charity this month. How many days we've been clean and sober. How consistent we've been with our quiet times. How obedient and polite our children are. Now, is there anything wrong with any of these things? No. Good things. Is there anything wrong with washing your hands? No. But the question is, can these things make us clean before God? No. And when these things are our priority, what very quickly happens is we keep people at arm's length so that they never see our struggles and our shortcomings and our temptations and our sins. And we stay away when we're having a hard week and we gather when we are doing good. That's what we do. Because we've become so obsessed with the outside to the detriment of the inside. And what it does is it produces a skin-deep religion that makes us look and appear squeaky clean. Squeaky clean. But Jesus says that's a mask. Hypocrites. Hypocrites. Here's the second way we can be like the Pharisees. We also exchange God's authority for man's authority. So we prioritize the outside over the inside. We also exchange God's authority for man's authority. This is the problem Jesus highlights in verse 8, isn't it? He says, you leave the commandment of God and hold to the tradition of men. And so it's not just that their kind of cleanness is only skin deep. It's also that their cleanness is self-declared. It's clean in their own eyes. These washing rituals weren't God's commands. They were their traditions. And they allowed them to feel really clean while condemning others as defiled. And exchanging God's commands, God's authority for our traditions, it feeds our pride and allows us to look down on others. This is something that God's commands never do. Because God's commands can be summed up in two ways. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. See? So the problem with this exchange, God's authority replaced by my authority, is that it creates a religion without God. A religion that is all about what I do and all about what I don't do. And then when I get it right, it is all about my glory. There's always this wrestling match that goes on within us between God's commands and our traditions, our kind of sense of what's best. Who gets to decide how we should live? Who gets to define what is clean? Who gets to define what is unclean? And it's really obvious kind of out there in the world that God's commands have been exchanged for people's preferences, but that's not who this challenges issued to. Here is a challenge for our church. This is the religious establishment. A challenge to our church. Here's the questions. Is God our primary audience? Is God our primary audience? And is it God's commands or our traditions that are in the driving seat? Really searching questions, aren't they? They're meant to be. Because anything else, even if it wears this mask of cleanness on the surface, will be deeply broken and really ugly underneath. It will cause fracture in our relationship with ourselves, because we will think we are clean when we're not. It will cause fracture in our relationship with God, because look what Jesus says. Worship without submission to God's word is worthless lip service. Vain. And there's this weird Korban thing that I don't know, maybe you knew everything about this when I read this weird Korban thing that Jesus talks about in verses 9 to 13, which shows that it's not just our relationship with ourselves that's broken, and not just our relationship with God that's broken, but also our relationship with others. This Korban thing, it was the tradition of dedicating something you owned to God. So the deal was, when you die, your stuff, whatever that was, would go to the temple. But the practice was being used to kind of dodge God-commanded responsibilities to look out for and look after your father and mother in their old age. So it became this little religious loophole that people were using. I can't help you, parents. Sorry. My money is devoted to God. And Jesus says that is not devotion. That is disobedience dressed up as worship. When the traditions of men are elevated over the commands of God, when we replace God's authority with our authority, it is always to the detriment of those God intends to provide for and protect. That's the point. And it's twisted, isn't it? It's a really ugly scene. And this is what hides behind the mask of religion without God that looks squeaky clean on the surface, but refuses to submit to his word. And Jesus lifts the mask. He unmasks it. And then what he does is he digs even deeper. This is heading number 2. Uncovering the depths of our human defilement. Uncovering the depths of our human defilement. We're going to read from verse 14. And Jesus is going to show his disciples that the heart of human defilement is the deep defilement of the human heart. Okay? Verse 14. Down to verse 23. And Jesus called the people to him again and said to them, "Hear me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him." Now let me just sidetrack for a minute, okay? There are some of us who've come to church this morning feeling deeply dirty and unclean because of things done to us. Conscious of that. Jesus is saying nothing done to us can make us unclean. So if you're here today and there's something that has happened in your past and someone has sinned against you and something that should never have happened has happened to you and you feel deeply dirty and unclean because of that thing, Jesus says that's not the case. That is not how God looks upon you. It's not something done to you that can defile you. But he does say the things that come out of a person are what defile him. And when he had entered the house and left the people, his disciples asked him about the parable. And he said to them, "Then are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart but his stomach and is expelled? Thus he declared all foods clean." So they can now eat prawn cocktails and pork. Okay? Verse 20. And he said, "What comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person." Now Jesus, he turns from speaking to the proud Pharisees, and he calls everybody, come and listen. They've been telling you, washing your hands will make you clean before God. Come and listen to what I have to say. Nothing outside a person can defile him. Rather, what comes from the inside is what makes us unclean. So Jesus is saying that the godless religious rule-keeping of the Pharisees, that cannot make us clean. Because no matter how hard we scrub, we can't wash our own sinful hearts clean. And so if you want to know the big questions of where does evil come from and where does sin come from, here's Jesus' answer. It comes from my heart. It comes from your heart. Not your physical heart that pumps blood round your entire body, but the bit of you that pumps all of your words and actions and thoughts and feelings round your whole being. Sin doesn't come from outside me. Sin comes out of me. And sin is what makes me unclean. And here's the thing. Sin that is outside in is washable if I work hard enough, isn't it? I can change my behavior. I can do a to-do list. I can adopt new traditions. I can adopt new routines. But uncleanness that is inside out, that is something that I cannot wash away. It's part of who I am. It's part of what I am. I can't blame anything else. I can't blame anyone else. My defilement is so deep that no matter how hard I scrub, I cannot wash myself clean. And the God who is holy and pure and perfectly clean is a God who sees your heart just as easily as I see the surface. He knows us, inside and out. He knows everything about you. He knows everything you've done in secret. He knows everything you've thought before you had a chance to grab hold of that thought. He knows everything you've ever said before you had a chance to bite your tongue. He knows everything you've ever felt towards him and towards others. We quoted last week from Jeremiah chapter 17. The heart is deceitful above all things, desperately sick. Who can understand it? This is the next verse. I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind. See, our hearts are uncovered before God, laid bare. There's nothing he doesn't see, and it isn't a pretty sight. It's a pretty miserable list Jesus gives us, isn't it? Jesus wants us to be really clear. When we point the finger of blame for our sinful stains, that finger had better be pointed right back at self. But if we're honest, we struggle with that, don't we? We struggle to accept that. We don't really like that. Don't like the responsibility of that. We're much more familiar with pointing to every excuse in the book to excuse the way that we have lived, and This plays out in all sorts of ways. Think about the way that we tend to apologize to one another because we get it wrong. We know we get it wrong, but it comes out in our apologies. There's almost always a but afterwards. I'm sorry. But I was pretty stressed this week about X, Y, Z. I'm sorry, but we have talked about this, and you were kind of pushing my buttons again. I'm sorry, but it's the example that I had passed down to me. That's what I saw, and so that's what I do. I'm sorry, but it isn't really my fault. Something outside me made me unclean. And Jesus says, no, your defilement, my defilement, it is deep. It is deep inside me, and then it works its way out of me. And so a more honest answer would be, I'm sorry that I snapped at you. My heart is full of slander and pride. I'm sorry that I lied to you. My heart is full of deceit and foolishness. It's got a kind of different ring to it, doesn't it? It's a bleak assessment of our human condition. Jesus says we are deeply defiled without the ability to wash ourselves clean. But notice in verse 17, notice who it is that Jesus is giving this explanation to. You see that? Who's he speaking to in verse 17? His disciples, yeah. So he's speaking now to the hard-hearted sailors from last week, isn't he? And he's not speaking to them to rebuke and condemn them, but he's speaking to them to give a loving diagnosis as the one who is the divine, the godly heart surgeon. Okay? The problem is not just dirty hands. That's what Jesus is saying. They say you're unclean because you have defiled hands. I'm saying your problem is way, way worse than that. It's not just your hands, it's deep, deep down in your sinfully unclean hearts. But this is not condemnation, this is kindness. Because once you know the problem, the diagnosis, you can recognize, see all of that washing cups and pots and kettles and couches? That is useless. But there is something deeper on offer to help me. And so let's read from verse 24. That's how we're going to finish off. Verse 24, and look at this little snapshot of how Jesus deals with a lady who knows she's unclean. Verse 24. From there he arose, and he went away to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and did not want anyone to know, yet he could not be hidden. But immediately a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit heard of him and came and fell down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile, a Syro-Phoenician by birth. I had to practice that this week. And she begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And he said to her, "Let the little children be fed first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Yes, Lord. Yet even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And he said to her, "For this statement you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." And she went home and found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. So if you're taking notes, here's the last heading this morning. Uncleanness under the table, met by undeserved mercy from Jesus. Uncleanness under the table, met by undeserved mercy from Jesus. And Jesus shows us here that the breadth of his cleansing grace, the breadth of his ability to wash us clean, is wide enough for the depths of our human defilement. Okay? Woman comes to Jesus, verse 25. She's not like the Pharisees and the scribes. She doesn't come kind of looking down her nose at his disciples. She doesn't come asking him questions and trying to interrogate him. She falls down at his feet and she begs him for help. She doesn't proudly think she deserves it. She doesn't proudly think that she is clean. She humbly recognizes that she has a problem. And if you're anything like me, on first reading, verse 27 seems pretty shocking, doesn't it? It seems pretty shocking. Jesus is suggesting that she's a dog. It's kind of got us squirming in our seats, isn't it? Claire was working yesterday. So it meant classic, like daddy tea time. So we had oven pizzas. And as me and Connie and Jude, we sat at the table with our oven pizzas. Our dog, Shiloh, her head just like pops up between my legs from under the table. Okay? Hoping that I'm going to drop something. Now, if she was smart, if she was a clever dog, she'd sit under one of the kids' seats and not mine. But nevertheless, that's the picture, isn't it? Kids at the table, they get fed first. Dog under the table, hoping for anything that she can get. Now, it's not very complimentary, is it? What Jesus says? Has he just had enough today and just started dishing out insults? That's what we wonder. The answer is no. The point that Mark is making is where you're from matters. Now, even though she was working, my wife was sending me gloating gifts after Scotland beat England in the rugby last night. So there we go. Where you're from matters. Here, even more so. Even more so. So Jesus is in the region of Tyre and Sidon, verse 24, which is non-Jewish territory. And then Mark tells us that this woman is a Syrophoenician and a Gentile, verse 26, which just means she isn't a Jew, which means in the eyes of the Jews, she is unclean. In the language of the Jews, she is a Gentile dog. And not only that, her daughter has an unclean spirit. And so this woman, her defilement is unclean. And she has just come to the Jewish Messiah, the King, begging for help. Now, we're sat squirming at the prospect of Jesus using the word dog. But notice, she doesn't get her back up about it, does she? She isn't offended by his response because Jesus isn't being unkind to her. He's showing her that the order of his mission is to the Jews first, the ones who've just rejected him, but not to the Jews only. It is children first, but not children only. And this encourages her immediate answer in verse 28, yes, Lord. Yet, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And so this is it. She knows she's not entitled to his help. She knows she is unclean. She knows that she is unworthy. As a Gentile, she knows she has no right to this king and she has no right to the kingdom that's been promised to God's people. And yet she falls at his feet and she demonstrates a humble dependence on Jesus by being happy to take the role of a dog scrounging under the table if it means even a scrap of his mercy falls her way. I think what we're meant to learn from this woman is that empty-handedness is always the starting point for receiving grace. Unmerited, undeserved, unworthy. Mark 7 is shocking in lots of ways, not because Jesus calls this woman a dog, but because the religious leaders are unmasked as being unclean, and the unclean outsider receives Jesus' gracious cleansing. Shocking. Grace and mercy are by definition undeserved. And having shown us the deep uncleanness of our hearts, Mark takes us here to the beating heart of the gospel. And we're meant to lament over, my heart is so deeply defiled. And yet here Jesus shows us that though God owes us nothing except judgment and hell, in Jesus he offers to us everything. That Jesus would take that judgment, the one who knew no sin, became sin, took our uncleanness on himself, so that in him we might become the righteousness, the purity, the perfectly washed ones of God. And so the question this morning isn't, have you come to church? You have. The question is, have you come to Jesus? Have you come to Jesus? Not having cleaned yourself up. Not with a mask on. Not not putting on a performance for the morning, but honestly confessing your uncleanness and then humbly trusting in his cross that can wash you clean. Have you done that? We're not entitled to it. But the beautiful thing here in this little interaction with this wee woman is that though we're not entitled to it, a crumb from his table is enough to make us clean.